yeah, we're going to get started. In undergrad, I'll tell you all my life, I used the PC. I haven't used the PC in so long. I haven't used the PC long. I'm like trying to figure out how to use the PC. It's like, I really fall in. All right, so we got to figure out when to get started.
All right, let's have some fun. I'm here for it. Now I've got to just fix one other quick thing on this computer, and then we're ready to rock and roll. Hey, good evening. My name is Ben Hickey. I'm the curator of exhibitions here at the Hilliard Art Museum. Oh, I'm sorry, Matt. Okay, my apologies. Take two. My name's Ben Hickey. I'm the curator of exhibitions at the Hilliard Art Museum. I'd like to thank our partners, AOC Community Media, for recording and live streaming this event. They're a fantastic resource in the community. And then before we really begin in earnest, I'd like to thank all of you who've chosen to spend your time with us this evening. And also thanks to Keith Calhoun, the New Orleans Museum of Art, the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, Stephen Dater Gallery, and the Historic New Orleans Collection for their support in the form of loans to Kasimu's exhibition. And you know, I always worry that a biography diminishes a speaker, but my excitement more often wins out. And this is definitely the case with L Kasimu Harris. He is a New Orleans-based artist, and he's currently the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities Documentary Photographer of the Year. Among the institutions that have exhibited his work are Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, the New Orleans Museum of Art, the Ford Foundation Gallery, Low Art Museum, the Museum of the African Diaspora, and the Museum of Contemporary Photography. He is a prolific writer and photographer. His images or words have appeared in the New York Times, Bitter Southerner, and publications by the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, as well as Aperture. He earned his MA in journalism from the University of Mississippi and was recently an artist in residence at the Joan Mitchell Center and the Center for Photography at Woodstock. And lastly, he's a committed philanthropist and a board member of the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, as well as a Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity member. It's important. It's important. Got to get the word out. And so with no further ado, I would like to welcome L Kasimu Harris.
Hey, y'all. How y'all doing? Apologies again. I hope everyone is well. If you have a flask, I encourage you to take it out now, and as well as pass it to the front, please. This is the front. I'm kidding. I have a couple of things to share with you all. I'm in a sharing mood, so I have a works in progress video to share. It's about 9 minutes, and then I also have this article that I just finished for Stranger Guide. I don't know if I'm supposed to be reading it yet, but you know, hey, they're not gonna sue me or anything like that. So I'll start with that, a few words, and hopefully it'll set up this whole kind of thing about this series, and you'll understand where I'm coming from with it. So it just finished, so it's like on my phone. My parents were entrepreneurs, faithful churchgoers, pet owners. They took the family on summer vacations, but my childhood wasn't entirely typical. I grew up in New Orleans, a very black New Orleans. In the 1980s, long before I hit puberty or even played Little League Baseball, my mother began ferrying me to a black-owned bar, the Winner's Circle. The bar was in a quaint one-story cinder block building off of St. Bernard Avenue in the 7th Ward, about 2 miles from the French Quarter. There, amid patrons sipping highballs, I watched and listened as my older sister sat in with the musicians singing. My love for black bars is rooted in these childhood experiences. That love grew in my teens and then after graduate school, when I would accompany fellow teachers to decompress over drinks, a fish fry, or a steak dinner. Black neighborhood bars were once ubiquitous across New Orleans. Then around 2017, I noticed that many of these venerable watering holes were swiftly shutting down, or even worse, turning into white-owned establishments. These losses were especially painful because of their displacement erased the culture and institutional history of so many neighborhoods. The social aid and pleasure clubs and the black masking Indians disappeared. Displacement is an all too familiar theme in New Orleans. Almost 17 years after Hurricane Katrina devastated the city in 2005, much of black life has disappeared. People, neighborhoods, and schools and bars were all washed away in a storm. The Winner's Circle was owned by Sylvia Cryer, a longtime educator who taught my sister in 1989, was my free enterprise teacher in 1997. She's 81 years old and still teaches. One of Cryer's high school students jokingly suggested that the bar be named because of a racehorse she owned always lost. While it was open from 1990 to 1999, the Winner's Circle was a premier destination for live music. It has since been replaced by a bar called Seals Class Act. Before she owned the Winner's Circle, Cryer co-owned Snug Harbor, not the Jazz Club Uptown, but she owned this place for 17 years. When I was a teenager, my father, Leroy Harris, guided me as I fell in love with jazz. I was immersed in the rare facets of New Orleans jazz culture, from its music clubs to private trumpet lessons to hunting down vinyl records. My father moved to the city in 1963 as a 20-year-old jazz trumpeter, patronizing black bars for music, food, and the camaraderie. My mother, Eartha Harris, was a New Orleans native and became an activist during the post-civil rights era. She managed an all-male soul band in the 1970s, and she and my father owned Hilliard Flowers and Balloons for more than 30 years. When my sister, Rosanna Ison, was about 10, she belted out a solo with the church choir, making my mother realize that her daughter was a precocious singer. Within little time, she was acting as my sister's manager, landing her gigs in clubs. You know, I'm not sure why I was in bars so young. My father, Leroy Harris, said he didn't really oppose to my mother introducing me to certain things. That was just her nature, he said. I remember she would hear a second line band, close up the shop, run out there with you. Both of us didn't have restraints. Once I was in the 9th grade and the sounds of a brass band filled the flower shop. I grabbed my trumpet and my mom locked the doors. We sprinted towards the band. The street was tight with people, strutting with music, some dancing on cars and porches. I tentatively eked out a few notes. Then a man, who I surmised had just left the bar, got extremely close to me and offered words of encouragement. This is what he said, pardon my French. You better blow that fucking horn. You better blow that motherfucking horn. I tried. Soon I started skipping high school dances. I was empowered with a car and a trumpet. That afforded me privileges to a young musician, namely interest to live music bars without parental guidance. I'll never forget the 1995 New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival when Wynton Marsalis joined fellow trumpeter Carmen Ruffinson's set at Little People's Place for a late night jam session. Little People's Place is a black-owned bar in Treme, one of the oldest neighborhoods in the black-owned neighborhoods in the nation. The bar is about the size of a small apartment. Its front door opens into a performance area. Musicians have to scooch aside to let patrons through. I was about 17, collar popped, wearing sunglasses, and my silver Bach trumpet was shine. I was clean, but I was the worst musician there. It was cats from the Mingus Big Band, Winton's Band, and other players. Winton blew a custom-made Monet trumpet, beautifully adorned with decorations that made it much heavier than other trumpets. Eventually, Winton grew tired of holding the horn and asked to borrow mine. I obliged. As I stood to the side, one of the bar patrons said, "I bet you ain't never heard your horn sound like that." He was right. You know, bars in New Orleans date back to the late 1800s. You had places like Economy Hall and so many other places where they were a respite for black folk. They were a gathering place. So they were the place that you could go when black folk, because of segregation, couldn't go anywhere else. So the lineage is long, and these spaces are about far more than drinks. At Economy Hall, they said the dances lasted until 4 a.m., and it was also a precursor to the Benevolent Society, which was a precursor to, Economy Hall wasn't a precursor to the benevolent societies, but they helped to form benevolent societies where black folk couldn't get insurance, so they would join these benevolent societies to ensure a proper burial. I remember my mother telling me as a child they would have funerals in the living room. It's kind of hard for me to imagine. And you know, you had places like Pythian Temple, and it's just a long history of bars in New Orleans. They were really prolific in the 50s and the 60s. I would think that they took a hit for a number of reasons. I have a cousin named Al Jackson who said that folk of his generation are a little bit different than folk of my generation. He said he's about 80, about 75, 80. He said they would only go where they knew their money was wanted. He said, my generation goes to anywhere they perceive our money to be wanted. As well as labor changed, you had the people who work offshore or not even on the docks. When that went to robotics, that shifted. When you had much later, much more recently, the dismantling of public schools in New Orleans, that changed the bars. This is much more comfortable. Yeah. Right. So bars just keep shifting, and I started noticing it around 2017. There's a stretch of land on St. Bernard Avenue. It's really close to the French Quarter. It's long been a black neighborhood, and for about 2 blocks on St. Bernard Avenue, 2 or 3 blocks, you would see just about 7 or 8 blocks. A guy named Victor Dawkins said in the 70s, you could barely walk on the street. It would be so many people going from bar to bar to bar. So when I was of age, I didn't hang out at those bars, but I do remember all the bars being white. So one time in around 2017, I started noticing the black bars like rapidly turning white. The reason why I say it's worse when a black bar turns white is because culture is displaced, right? I guess imagine if somewhere iconic like Chinatown in New York all of a sudden was Starbucks, Hooters, and devoid of its cultural richness. That's what I mean, that type of displacement. And I started noticing it there. And what happens when a black bar turns white is that all the things that emanate from it, be it social aid and pleasure clubs, the community that builds, the Black Masking Indians where they perform as well as practice in these bars, that's displaced, period. So it's really like a violent thing, not as in a physical violence, but an emotional violence. For me, it was very emotional too, coming off the heels of Hurricane Katrina when your city, as well as much of the region, rapidly changed. So that's kind of like a setup. I want to show you this video that's a work in progress. And hopefully you like it and give me your honest feedback, and we'll see what happens. I could just hit play. It's a little bit longer than that, but thank you. The rest, the second part, it gets really dark, and I see it's kind of hard to see. Did y'all notice the little boy dropped his cell phone and keep that? Yeah, he didn't even miss a beat. Right. So, all right, we're going to bring Ben up here, and we'll just kind of talk a little bit about some of the photos and what it inspired me, and after that, definitely open for questions. I love questions, so let's roll.
Here we go. So, you know, we talked earlier today, should you show work that's not finished?
Right.
And we talk about things where you're vulnerable a lot in relationship to this exhibition. So what do you think about sharing an unfinished work with people and having it recorded and having members of the media with access to that file?
You know, I heard Artie Shaw talk one time, and Artie Shaw, the jazz clarinetist, he said that, he appreciated Benny, I'm paraphrasing, he said he appreciated Benny Goodman's band, Benny Goodman, the King of Swing. He said, but Benny Goodman's band, they played perfectly. And he said that what that meant is that they weren't trying, because if you play something the same thing over and over again, you can get it perfect. And he said in music, a mistake is when you can mentally conceive the idea and you're reaching for it, but you can't just physically do it yet. Maybe a little bit more technique. So this video had mistakes, I'm sure, but I want to be always reaching for something. So that's the way you get better. I remember playing trumpet, and my sister was a musician too. And sometimes I just wanted to practice what I knew, just because she'd be like, "Boy, you sound sad," But if you're not reaching, you're not trying, and if you're not trying, you're not growing. So there it is.
Excellent. And so from that standpoint, it's funny that we're talking about a photo exhibition, we're talking about videos and sculpture first.
Right.
But that dovetails really nicely into, when this series had been exhibited at the August Wilson Cultural Center, African American Cultural Center in Pittsburgh, you were kind of surprised by a bar tableau as like an element of exhibition design and less an aesthetic statement. And in this iteration of the show, it's very much part of your aesthetic vision for the show. And that came out of a couple different urges that we were talking about. Some sculptural and trying to really capture the sensibility of the bars, and others as a platform for media other than photography. And so can you walk me through where you came to the point that we have the Honey Bear's Hotspot Bar and Lounge in the exhibition?
The dinner at Compare Le Pan, when we had dinner maybe October of last year, and he asked what made me vulnerable, about this exhibit. Basically, what would I try that could give me some type of trepidation? And I told him doing video as well as doing this sculpture that you see back there. And he just reassured me about how it could be done. And that, for me, I knew what I wanted. I knew exactly how I needed it to look, but to do it, so he has an excellent team here who really helped make that happen. And, spending so much time in these bars, it's just a mode to them, a feel to them that I wanted to capture, that I thought the photos definitely did it justice, but to walk into a space that you could feel, that you could touch, that you could sit, would heighten museum goers' experiences. So that's why we did that, and I'm extremely happy with it.
Well, and I also thought that, it's both an acknowledgement and the perfect vehicle for it. A television in a bar is a perfect vehicle for video art, where it's just kind of it's incorporated into the aesthetic. It's not just being projected in a kind of sterile way. So it's kind of becoming of the environment it's referencing. And I feel like it's showing a deeper connection. Right. And I thought that was really cool when you're like, can we put a TV in there? And I was like, I don't know. Yeah, of course we can. We should. And so I feel like it's this great support statement to the photography, which is the reason why the show needed to happen. And so I don't mean to start talking about everything but the photography. But like you said, those are the things like reaching and excitement, but truly the photos are what drew me to the work. You know, the colors are super saturated. The shadows are super, super dark. This sense of place exudes itself inside the images. And so, like, from a technical standpoint, how do you capture these images? Because I am a photographic moron, essentially, for lack of a better term. Like, from a technical standpoint, what are you doing in the space to capture these images? It seems miraculous, especially if you can see them in back of house with the glazing off. Like, if you can see them, how they come off the printer, like, truly, like, how in the world are you doing this? How many of your secrets are you willing to share?
I don't think I'm, as it pertains to photography, I'm not like a techie, you know. I heard Daoud, who you met, he said when people ask him, and I know you're not asking me this, I'm just saying, when people ask him what kind of camera does he use, he always says like a camera, like, he's like, do you ask a do you ask a writer what type of typewriter they use? You know, so I can tell you this. I remember going to, well, first, it's like I'm influenced by dark photos. So I grew up really looking at Blue Note albums, and that was Francis Wolff. And he used a flash for most of those photos. I used a flash one time, LED light, the very first night, and then I just never brought one again. You find it's in the middle of a bar, and you don't want someone to trample over it, so it's a hazard that way. So Roy DeCarava is another influence, really, really dark photos. And I remember going to Italy in graduate school, and we saw a lot of art. And and I don't mean this in a bad way, but it got redundant to me. And the art that stuck with me the most was Bernini and Caravaggio, like the way his shading. So when I take photos, you know, that's where I'm coming from. And the bars just, you know, if you can see the light, you can kind of see the reflection of someone's face. You need to know technique to get it. So like the technical part is like, you're gonna have really low depth of field, so it makes everything really shallow behind you. You're gonna have a higher aperture, but if your aperture is too high, you get a lot of noise. And it's seeing, and I think that comes from, I learned composition first. You know, I learned composition and then technique caught up. So like I know enough technique to get those ideas out, going back to the Artie Shaw, you know, kind of thing. And, you know, even when I do, you know, this project definitely was also influenced by Bernie Imes. And I noticed a difference between my photos and his. He did 4x5, which I definitely know how to do a 4x5. But I look at those, the photos in juke joints, they weren't densely populated photos, and a lot of it was daytime photos. You know, so the inherent nature of a 4x5 camera is much slower. It's not even roll photography, it's sheets. So, you know, you get 2 sheets, then you got to take it out. So with the second line and things like that, I need to work quick. And the one time I did do 4x5 in Pittsburgh, FedEx lost it all. So, yeah, I did 4x5 of black bars in the Hill District, and 4x5 cost like $55 for 10 sheets, and they lost like 50 sheets. So, yeah, right.
Well, you know, you talked a lot about your influences, and another section that I haven't done for a solo show for an artist ever was a section of influences, and that's why I thanked all those other institutions in my opening remarks, because like we really are grateful for those loans. But you know, as an educational facility here, it's important for us to create those connections to students and also community who cared to know as well. And they're awesome photos, so y'all should go see those too. But you touched on the content of one of them when you're reading your story. The picture from the Little People's Place is in there because they had the negative in the Historic New Orleans collection, so you can see a young Kasimu in there in the gallery. So it's this wonderful kind of, the whole point of that section is to be connected to history, and the whole point of the whole series is be connected to history. So it's this wonderful double or triple metaphor happening. And with that in mind, the man who took that photo, you have another connection to him now as of this particular year. Previously, the documentarian award for LEH was named after Michael P. Smith. And so can you tell me a little bit about how he informs your work as in the way that some of the other artists you've mentioned have?
I've looked through, I was exposed to his work for a while without knowing who took it. I actually thought a guy named Frank Stewart, who worked with Wynton Marsalis for many years, I thought he took that photo, and he knew immediately he didn't take it. So that's how familiar I was with Michael's work. And I've gone to the Historic New Orleans collection and, really kind of looked through it. And he was doing all black and white film. And he just, he had this ability to follow his curiosity. And I think that's what led him to many of the scenes that he took. A lot of it was of a black New Orleans life. But then on the flip side of that, as a black photographer, I didn't see much representation in New Orleans of it. Even though they had it, I just wasn't exposed to it, right? They had Keith and Chandra, they had Marion Porter, Eric Waters. They had a lot of it, but I definitely remember coming to a second line and just not seeing people who look like me take photos. And it just gave me this unwavering desire to tell stories of my community and have someone who looked like me to tell it. Because I know off the top, first of all, I think anyone can tell stories from any community, right? Of any community. I don't have a problem with that. Unfortunately, a lot of black stories don't get told by black people, and that black genius is often not commodified through the black culture bearers or the black storytellers. I even wrote about that to a degree for the Ogden, this essay called Dismantling Southern Photography, about New Southern Photography, that the people who are most promoted for Southern photography, be it Walker Evans, William Christianberry, Sally Mann, that's all white people, 2 white men and a white woman. But the South isn't a monolith, be it race, gender, sexual orientation, and we need more of that. People telling those stories from various communities, which makes it much more richer, right? Everything is better through diversity. I mean, because you just have this experience. I know, when I've gone to various things, be it like the Poynter Institute in Florida, because I'm hanging out with people from a different culture, I learned about Zoom. This is 2008. I learned about Arrested Development, the show is like, and then I learned about Curb Your Enthusiasm. If I was hanging out with people who only looked like me, I probably would have never watched those shows. So it's a beauty in being diverse.
Well, and with respect to kind of both celebrating the community and being comfortable with anyone celebrating the community, supporting it from within is really important. And you touched on social aid and pleasure clubs in your initial remarks. And what's their status in conjunction with these bars? Like, are they still thriving with respect to their ability to lend aid to community members, or is that something that's at this point just largely memory-based?
Well, I don't think certain things like insurance, I don't think they have to handle that anymore, but they still are vital. And one other thing that's really important about these social aid and pleasure clubs as it relates to the community is that, you have about 42 weeks that people second line. So no matter what you do, right, there's lawyers, doctors, but there's a lot of blue collar people, particularly in the past where they weren't celebrated in the world. This was the day that they could be celebrated in a community. Everybody come out and rejoice, and they dressing up to the nines. That's still very important. So some of the community needs have shifted, but you do have bars like Syl's Class Act, where she also has this very big outreach component where for Easter they have a ball, or they're doing drives, back to school drives. Kermit Ruffins, people could go and get their hair cut in the beginning of the school year. So I'm still digging in to the brilliance and the things that they do in the community, but these are the things that I know that still happens.
Cool. And, as we've talked about institutions like bars going away, my mind drifts towards all kinds of at-risk institutions, like the pandemic could knock them out or what have you. And I kind of worry about about New Orleans and other places in Louisiana kind of becoming like a cultural Disneyland, as opposed to, a place that celebrates the past as opposed to something that is in the present tense. And so in a more broad sense than just the bars or just the Black community, but including those at the same time, like, where do you see New Orleans going culturally in a good way and in a bad way? Like, speak for where you're from. You're on the record.
I often say I am who I am because of New Orleans, and I am who I am despite New Orleans, right? It's a very dichotomous feeling from being from that area. I often don't know where it's going. I think it's burning the candle at both ends of the wick. You have some respect. The economy is getting a little bit better, but crime's getting worse. You have more and more people moving to the city. You have more and more people getting displaced. You have some modern amenities coming, but the streets still suck, like literally. So I just think that, I think it's probably like most places where you need the politicians to do things for the people and not the people broadly, big P, not little people of the business community who seems to just get like a fat cat, just bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's hard to say where New Orleans is going, but oftentimes it seems to be going both places really fast, for better and for worse, like concurrently.
Well, what do you think we trade microphones and see if anyone has questions? That one's wireless, so I needed to walk away.
All right.
Does anyone have any questions for Kasimu, or is it presumptuous? Oh, here we go.
So I was very interested in the video. Some of the shots you took of them kind of doing a second line dancing, was that underneath the Claiborne Expressway, or?
Yep,
Yeah?
one of them was, yeah.
Right. So I think what really struck me about watching some of those scenes in the video was thinking about the fact that what was there before that expressway.
Right.
And I just kind of imagined those people dancing among those trees and that green space that was there. And so I feel like there's some layered quality to what you're doing, because it's not only showing, this loss that's happening today, but the losses, the losses that have happened generation after generation to that community. So I love the work that you're doing. I definitely think we need to tell those stories, and we need to tease out those kinds of realizations for people so that they can realize that this is not something that just happened in a moment,
Right.
you know, where people are losing their culture in a moment. This is a continuous thing that continues over and over and over again. And I don't know if that was your intention or not, but I think that that's what's coming out in that video.
Thank you. It's something I'm definitely thinking about just in that community. So that was going down St. Bernard Avenue, and then we got to the Claiborne overpass. And I think somewhere around the middle 50s, the mid 50s, they decided to put an interstate in New Orleans, and they had a lot of different thoughts of where to put it. It ended up splitting the black community. And my father said that he thought Claiborne Avenue was prettier than St. Charles Avenue, that's lined with these oak trees. And you could see the remnants of these. They weren't mansions, but very, very big homes, right? On St. Bernard Avenue, no, Claiborne Avenue, that were businesses, colleges, some perhaps residential. But so we think about the violence of that, the removal of these trees, the displacement of the community. Then Louis Armstrong Park, hundreds of homes in a predominantly black community were razed to make way for that displacement again. And that argument has come up again recently when they were considering putting City Hall in Treme. And that effort was led by a black woman. On the surface, I've heard activists talk about some major developers who were really, really behind that. So far, it seems to be dead, but that will be further displacement to this community, right? So yeah, I'm thinking about a lot of these things in my work, and when I would start to Google these places, there's no record of them. Like, you know, you could Google a restaurant that may have been shuttered for 50 years, if it was kind of iconic, and someone wrote about it. If they had a recipe, it lives on. I mean, even the legend of Buddy Bolden, you know, there's one picture of him, no recordings, but we can say his name and get a reference. These black bars, there's no record of them. You're gonna look and it's just gonna say permanently closed. And I'm not even talking about bars that closed a long time ago. You had this place called Next Stop. It closed maybe in 2017, and this is just as if it didn't exist, right? So what happens is, you know, unfortunately with a lot of stories of the black community, too many of them are being told from the grave, and obviously we can't hear it. So that's what really propels me with this project, just trying to uplift and do the ethnography work of this, you know. I'm just kind of surprised that it hadn't been done in a very intentional way. I'm not the first photographer to go into these bars, but just to do like a very committed, long look at it. I hadn't seen that before.
Oh, here we go.
Hi. Before asking my question, I just want to say congratulations on such a wonderful exhibit. I absolutely loved it. And
Thanks.
it's just, it just brings back so many memories and wonderful feelings. And when I think about the 7th Ward, sometimes I just want to cry, today even. But I think that in some ways it's seeing a renaissance in your work that is being displayed, and our current poet laureate is from and still lives in the 7th Ward, and I saw a home in Southern Living magazine from the 7th Ward, like a full 7-page spread a few months ago, and I was just like, I can't believe what I'm seeing, in these artistic realms, and this is a great example of that. So that's just what I wanted to say, comment. But my question is, when I was looking at your exhibit, I thought, how in the world did you make the selections for what you chose? You talked about being driven first by composition and then secondarily by technique. What is it? Because I just think you must have hundreds, if not thousands, of images, and there might be maybe less than 20 or 20-ish there, and then plus your influences. So I was just wondering, what was the drive for this particular selection? And also, how do you feel being in it yourself? Because there was the picture of the young you in there, and did you have any trepidation about that? So those are my questions. Thank you.
I'm not the kind of photographer who minds being in front of the camera. I've been taking pictures longer than I've been taking pictures, if that makes sense. So I don't mind. And I do like the tie-in that for that picture is like in a black bar, like a young kid not even thinking about that. So I think it's a really good kind of thing. It adds to the exhibition for me. Just a little short joke. When Ben was trying to get the photo, they have like cut line information, like who's in it, and I'm like, Ben, they don't even know who I am. And he was like, one day they will. You work with a curator. So I learned a long time ago, as far as selecting images, you don't send people photos you don't like. You especially editorial, you don't do that. Half the time, that's what they're gonna pick. Right. So I sent him like a selection of images, probably like 50, and he whittled it down from there. But lately, I've been going through and like really trying to organize it, and it was like 100 photos out of like you said, thousands. I was like, ooh. So you get that. And so it's always a good thing. And, it's like a musical reference too, right? When you play in a solo, you don't play everything you know in one solo. So an exhibition is like that too. You don't have to shove in everything at one time. I'm confident there'll be other opportunities, and you have to have room to let it breathe. And it was some from the other exhibition in Pittsburgh that weren't in this one. I did want to add 6 new photos just cause. So that's how that went for the selections.
And here we go, Ralph.
You must be one hell of a people person. And the reason why I say that is the way in which you handled your subjects. Your subjects are just themselves. There's no pretense, there's no sensationalism. It's just them. You've got the essence of those people, right? I'm sorry, but you have the essence of the piece, of the persons there. I just find that just amazing. And that's pretty much what I got to say, I guess. It's not really a question. It's just, you must be a hell of a people person.
I mean, I can elaborate on that. I've always been fascinated by people and stories, and I'm an ear hustler. I'm gonna listen to your conversation if I'm standing close. In undergrad, I spoke to the janitor all the time. I knew his name, Mr. Robert, in my dorm room. So it is like inherently who I am. Like, I really do love people. And then I've been writing or reporting about 4 years longer than photography. So you have to talk to strangers all the time. And even as a photojournalist, you have to get people to feel comfortable quickly. Because if you're uncomfortable, you could tell, like even in just your words on paper or looking at something. And I grew up in New Orleans. I went to these black bars, some of them as a kid, some of them as an adult. But I still have, I won't say anxiety, but a little nervousness of walking into these places. And you just have to quickly overcome it. I figured out a little method the biggest cheat is to go in when they have a second line. It's just everybody in there. That's the big cheat. But when that's not happening, you talk to the bartender first. If there's a strong bartender, if they give you permission, you have permission to the world. If you talk to a patron, and they are like a patron who can handle up on people, because I had that in Pittsburgh. The owner told me, yeah, and the bartender was giving me issue, and basically the patron overruled the bartender. So those like patron, owner, bartender, and then you do have to ask permission. So I ask people permission. I've been told no twice, once in New Orleans, once in Pittsburgh, but the guy in Pittsburgh, he saw me the second day. And he was like, "You gonna take my photo today?" So, I guess I've been told no once. But it's a real cool thing. You have to work through your own kind of like being reticent to go in there, and you have to do it rather quickly. And, for every bar I go into, after I finish, I'm gonna sit and have some drinks and then go on home.
All right, is there, yes, here,
To take selfies. Yeah. No. Selfie. No. I used it the other day, but I was hanging out. I was like with my wife and some other people, and we were in a black bar, and I just kind of went into work mode, and I did video, but I wouldn't do it like if I went there with the intent to take photos. Nah. But like I said, if I finish a selfie, like your boy at work. But other than that, no.
Is there a final question?
Hi.
Hey.
I'm curious, when you come into these places and you're so invested in it, you're coming from it, but you're also showing it. How do you navigate the tensions between, let's say, nostalgia and activism, or the way that these worlds are lost and the way that they're present already? Does that make sense to you, the question? Like when you take a picture, when you go there, when you're seeking something, some essence, what are you trying to communicate to us?
We are here. We're important. Really, that's the theme that goes through my head. And, how I feel is still ongoing too, because, I'm still in the throes of the exhibit. And I was talking to like Sylvia Cryer the other day, my teacher, and the winner's circle had been 2 or 3 bars before that, and it's still a bar now. The importance of that is not necessarily that this bar didn't last, but that bar is black and it's still there, So for a while, I was like, these bars can't close, which I still believe, but if one owner takes it over and it still remains true to what it was, that's a win for me. I know there's some Irish pubs in New Orleans. Since me going to them, they've had 2 or 3 different ownerships, but the people who have taken them over realize the community and the importance of it, and they may have made some additions, but it wasn't a revamp and an erasure of that institution. So I'm looking at it as someone who's deeply invested and very fascinated by it. And I think it could serve as both things at the same time. For people who nostalgia for people who hadn't seen these photos before and hadn't been into that bar in quite a long time. From any community, you know, I've had people say, well, that red reminds me of the bar that was in my dad's house in the 60s in, you know, Iowa or whatever. I'm just making up a place. But I've been told that, you know. People drink in Iowa, I'm sure. But at the same time, that very same picture is, you know, working towards another narrative. So I think I know they can exist at both things at the same time. And that's definitely how I feel. But the importance is, what it's saying is, we are here, right?
Kasimu, did you have any closing comment, or was there one more question?
Thank you. Since 2020, we've embarked on many uncomfortable conversations. With that being said, how have you handled that discomfort from a public audience with a title such as Vanishing Black Bars Lounges? You know, that can maybe hit home for some others differently than people from that particular community. What would you say to people with that discomfort, with the feeling of not understanding the culture and talking about it, and how we do need to have those conversations to progress forward?
People feel a way when you say black, period. You know, if it was a Black Pride parade, people would feel a way. But when we have an Irish American parade, the Italian Day parade, the Jewish Community Center, anything, it's accepted, right? I don't think, but black is just a strong color, it's just a strong word, and it makes people feel a certain way when it shouldn't. So there's that. And my work it's not about tearing down any other community or an indictment on a community. It's more so of telling the story of my community when no one else cared to do so, for whatever reasons. Definitely as a black person, there are, I think that growing up in New Orleans, I think I'm in a unique position to, I grew up in New Orleans, but then I have a fascination of an outsider, right? There's that. So it gives you that curiosity to go into your community like you ain't ever been there before. But sometimes, oftentimes, as a storyteller, you may have to decide on what projects you pursue, right? And sometimes people may have a leg up on you from outside communities, be it that they know how to write a grant, be it that they might have funding from some other sources, be it that, you know, your dad was a governor. And I know a couple of people whose dads truly were governors. And so this doesn't immediately pay, right? I could have easily been like, well, I want to do this project, but it's not paying, so let me shoot a wedding, or let me do a whole bunch of journalism stuff, and I would have really missed out. But not everyone is afforded to do that, and they are, so that's that. And if people feel uncomfortable, I think it's okay to feel uncomfortable, you know? That's growth. It really is, you know? Being exposed to something that you didn't know, going back to Artie Shaw, trying something that you hadn't done before and maybe not getting it all the way right, that's growth. And I have gotten a little pushback to kind of sum it all up. A guy I know sent me a message, and I hadn't responded yet, but he said, you should rename your exhibit Vanishing Black Bars, I think it's not aptly named, basically. And I know him. I would say he's a friend. We worked together for a long time. And for a second, I looked up vanishing. I was like, you know what? I knew what I was talking about, but I'm like, vanishing just means quickly disappearing. His point was that it should be named, he said some black bar owners sell and they make a lot of money, which is true to a degree, right? So you may sell a property for $700,000, and unfortunately, not all of this is along racial lines. Some black people with $700 may not see the importance of investing, so they may not buy that building. And bars are not just always the most lucrative businesses. So you have that. So you may have someone from another community who has $700,000 who could come in and buy this building, but $700,000 to him is different. He or she had a different line of capital, line of credit. They don't have to give up anything in their community. When Mr. Whomever sells that building for $700,000, that's his retirement for he and his descendants for however long, right? That is this cultural capital, this tradition that is now no longer there. So along economic lines as well as cultural displacement lines, that $700,000 ain't the same, So yeah, he was really wrong saying like it could be wealthy black bar owners, because that's not wealth, That's still displacement. And that's how I feel about that. And I would say thank y'all so much for coming and sitting here. And if you have any more questions, we'll be here for a while. And thank you to this entire organization, and definitely to Ben Hickey. And this is a beautiful representation of my work, and it's something I'm extremely proud of. And to anyone listening online, Lafayette isn't a bad drive. Come on up.
It's real close.